What's up, everybody? It's Josh over here with the Manchise, and we're going to be breaking down UFC Fight Night, Uriah Hall versus Anderson Silva. More of the usual here, man. We're going to go over things from a betting perspective, also from a DFS perspective. Just recap UFC 254 last weekend. It was a great weekend for me, man. The card that I presented to you guys. I think it put up 590 fantasy points, went 5-1. The only fighter on that card that didn't win was Nathan Wood, who still had a pretty ridiculously good fantasy performance, and I believe he was part of the optimal lineup. I was just a couple points shy of the optimal, and it was crazy because Khabib didn't end up with the optimal, man, which sucks, but shout out to Khabib and a great career. I think he's going to stay retired. But anyway, enough of last week. Let's get right into this week. I want to keep things rolling here for you guys. Provide you guys with another money-making card just like we did last week. And we're going to kick things off with the main event on this card, which is a fight taking place in the middleweight division between Uriah Hall and Anderson Silva. Two historically flashy strikers. These guys have been around a long time, and they have a ton of highlights between the both of them. So though this isn't the greatest card, this is still a main event that I'm kind of happy that it's come to fruition, and hopefully it ends up being pretty exciting. So we'll start off with Uriah Hall, who's only got a record of 15-9, which is kind of hard to believe. At one point this guy was like blue chip prospect, was absolutely ridiculous on The Ultimate Fighter. He's 3-2 in his 5 most recent UFC fights. Victories over Antonio Carlos Jr. He knocked out Bevin Lewis. He also was able to knock out Christoph Jocko. The 2 losses sprinkled in there: Gegard Mousasi, who he had beat earlier in his career, and Paulo Costa, which he actually looked pretty good in that fight. Costa ended up just bringing some ridiculous pressure, catching him and knocking him out. He was able to finish him. On the flip side, for Anderson Silva, 34-10 as a professional, man, former champion, one of the greatest to ever do it. He is 1-4 in his 5 most recent fights. His only victory was unanimous decision victory over Derek Brunson. Brunson looked horrible in that fight, by the way. And some of these losses: Jared Cannonier, Israel Adesanya, Daniel Cormier, Michael Bisping. So, I mean, he's always fought guys that are at the top of that middleweight division. In that fight against Cormier, he took that last minute UFC 200, I believe, and fought him all the way up at like light heavyweight, which was just absolutely crazy. We know how both these guys are going to approach this fight, man, right? Like, this fight is not going to go to the ground. These guys are going to strike. There's going to be a lot of kick techniques from the both of them. If this was Anderson Silva 6-7 years ago, I think he'd be a heavy favorite. But I'm looking at the odds for this one right now, and Uriah Hall is obviously the favorite. He's at minus 225. Silva's plus 185. I think Silva, at 45 years old, I'm surprised that he's even fighting in the UFC, still booking fights for him at this point. I think he's been dust now for quite a while. And from all indication, this will probably be his last fight in the octagon. In my opinion, it should be his last professional fight, regardless of the promotion. I have to like Uriah Hall here. And to me, it just comes down to whether or not he gets the finish. Silva has proven to be pretty durable, though. That's the one thing that's a little bit interesting, right? Like, he was able to survive against Adesanya. He was able to survive against Cormier. He survived against Bisping. Though he's lost a lot of fights, he's a guy that's able to at least go the distance. Now, we didn't see that against Cannonier. Cannonier basically just leg kicked him to shit. And we know that Silva has had some injuries to those legs, right? When he broke his tibia against Chris Weidman. So got to keep that in the back of our minds as well. But I think ultimately Hall gets it done. Like I said, I'm not sure if he's able to get him out of there, but I feel pretty comfortable, especially at minus 225. I really like those odds. For me, it's a Uriah Hall. It's Uriah Hall's fight to lose. When it comes to DFS, this is interesting based on what we were just talking about, right? Because generally when I'm putting together a lineup on DraftKings, I'm looking for guys that can finish their opponent. And Uriah Hall, he does have a decent finishing rate when he does win his fights, right? Like he was able to knock out Jocko, he was able to knock out Bevan Lewis. He's finished Mousasi, Bambagos, Stallings. This is a guy who's got a victory over Thiago Santos. So Uriah Hall is a legit fighter. He's fought nothing but tough competition in the UFC. He's been in there with Paulo Costa, Brunson, Whitaker. It just comes down to whether or not he can get the finish here. But I like him just because he's a main event fighter and he's priced down. He's only 8,600. So you can pretty much get him in any lineup that you can construct. He's generally not the greatest fantasy performer. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers: 60, 75, 29, 93 in his most 4 or 5 recent fights. But that's fine. If he can get 75, 80 points at 8,600, you're content with that. And with Silva being 45 years old, and I just don't think he's much of a threat at this point in his career, I think that's really the minimum that you're looking at with Uriah Hall. It's probably somewhere around 65, 75 points. With a chance to finish Silva, that number could go up to 90 to 100 range. So I really do like Uriah Hall. It's going to be hard for me to get to Anderson Silva this week. He is priced down at 7,600, which is reasonable. But if you look at his fantasy performances as of late, they are not good. 4 points against Cannonier, 16 against Adesanya, 52 against Brunson, not bad, 9 against Cormier, 48 against Bisping. I mean, this guy he doesn't have a ton of output any longer now that he's 45 years old and well past his prime. So I will be avoiding Anderson Silva at all costs. So we'll move on to the co-main event, which is probably the best fight on this card. This is a fight taking place in the featherweight division between Bryce Thug Nasty Mitchell and Andre Touchy-Feely. Both these guys are, these are guys that have found myself rooting for in the past. And here they are clashing against each other. We'll start off with Bryce Mitchell, who's 13-0, undefeated fighter. He's 4-0 in the UFC, victories over Tyler Diamond, Bobby Moffitt, Matt Sales, and Charles Rosa. Andre Feely, 21-7. He is 3-2 in his 5 most recent fights. Victories over Charles Jourdain, Shaman Moraes, Miles Jury, and those losses came to the hands of Sadiq Youssef and Michael Johnson. Definitely a clash of styles in this one, right? Andre Feely is a well-rounded fighter, but we know that Bryce Mitchell, he's a grappler by trade. He's got really good jiu-jitsu skills as well. The difficult thing with Bryce Mitchell, though, is despite how good he is at jiu-jitsu, he only has 1 finish. Now, it was a twister, which is insane, right? Second person to ever pull that off in the octagon, outside of Korean Zombie. But his other outside of that submission victory against Matt Sales, his other fights went the distance. He got victories in them, and he pretty much controlled those fights the entire time. Now, Bobby Moffitt, Tyler Diamond, Charles Rosa, I mean, these guys aren't top-level fighters in the featherweight division. I think Andre Feely is definitely a step up in competition here for Bryce Mitchell. So this is going to be an interesting one. Andre Feely, he's pretty good everywhere. I mean, he's a guy that prefers to strike, keep things standing, but he will mix it up. He's not afraid to grapple. He's not afraid to wrestle. I mean, he's got that team alpha male training behind him. So you know that he's got a good team behind him, and he's going to be prepared wherever the fight goes. One of the things that I wanted to look at Andre Fili, he's 21-7. Well, how has he lost his fights, and who did he lose his fights to? So he lost to Sadiq Youssef, decision. Michael Johnson, split decision. Calvin Kattar, decision. Yair Rodriguez, he was head kicked. You have to go all the way back to 2015 when he lost to Pepe by triangle choke. And he also was guillotine choked by Max Holloway in 2014. So only has 2 losses by submission. And I have to take that into account when I'm breaking down this fight, knowing that he's going up against a jiu-jitsu guy and grappler and Bryce Mitchell. This one's interesting to me. I understand that Bryce Mitchell's a big prospect here, and he's undefeated, but I don't know if I love him here at -135. This is a prove-it fight to me for Bryce Mitchell. Let's pull up some stats. I want to pull up some stats here, and this will give me a little bit more insight. So Andre Fili, 69% takedown defense. Bryce Mitchell, 41% takedown accuracy. That takedown accuracy is pretty solid for Bryce Mitchell, but Andre Fili's takedown defense isn't awful. So, you know, this fight in that first round, we're going to see Mitchell shoot in for a takedown, and if Fili's able to fend it off, then I think he instantly becomes the favorite in the bout, because I think his striking is much more technical and more polished. So based on all that information, I'm going to lean Fili here, but this isn't a fight I'm comfortable betting one way or the other, because I could really see it go both ways. When it comes to DraftKings, this is a difficult fight for me to get a ton of exposure to. Bryce Mitchell's priced at $8,500. He's had some pretty good fantasy performances thus far. 107 points against Rosa, 113 points against Sales, 47 against Moffitt, 64 against Diamond. You know, a lot of that has come from securing 3-4 takedowns and advances, really. He's able to just continue to advance, put himself in good positions, and can control things while it's on the ground. I don't know why that was twisting me up. He can control things when the fight gets to the ground. I would probably have a little bit of Bryce Mitchell exposure and a little bit of Andre Fili exposure at 7,700. Right? I mean, in his last fight against Jourdain, he was able to take him down 5 times. Also landed 44 significant strikes, racked up 92 fantasy points. In his loss to Youssef, he was able to take him down 3 times. Still put up 40 fantasy points. 110 against Moraes, 79 against Jury. So Fili has been a pretty good fantasy performer. I will probably have a little bit more Fili than I have Bryce Mitchell, but I'm going to dabble on both sides. So we'll move on to the next fight in the main card. This is a fight between Kevin Holland and Charlie Ontiveros. And Charlie Ontiveros is taking this fight on short notice. Kevin Holland was supposed to fight Mahmoud Muradov, and that one fell through. Subsequently, Kevin Holland is now a huge favorite. I'm just looking at the odds here. Kevin Holland is... Let's see if I can get some odds for this one. I don't even have the odds, because this is just... This fight just came together, but he's going to be a huge favorite. I can tell you that. And the reason for that is Kevin Holland has been really good recently. He's 4-1 in his 5 most recent fights. Victories over Alessio Di Chirico, Anthony Hernandez, Joaquin Buckley, and a split decision victory most recently a month ago against Darren Stewart. His only loss came to Brendan Allen during that stretch. For Charlie Ontiveros, this is a guy that's making his UFC debut. He's most recently fought for an organization called Fury, but he does have experience fighting for LFA as well. Now, Charlie Ontiveros, I didn't have a chance to put a ton or do a ton of research on this guy, but one of the things that I am impressed with him is, if you go down his resume, most of his victories are via finish, right? So he beat Washington Luiz by punches, Derek Ajday, that was by TKO, Clovis Hancock, body kick. But, you know, here's the thing that's tricky. When you look at his resume, the level of competition that he fought has just not been great. Washington Luiz was 5-4. Derek Ajday was 3-5. He lost to a guy by the name of Will Morris, who is 1-0. Clovis Hancock, 2-2. Nikolai Veretinikov, 2-3. He just hasn't fought anyone with the level of experience that Kevin Holland has. And, Kevin Holland is just tricky everywhere. He's also going to have a size advantage. He's an inch taller. He's 5 inches longer in reach. So I think Kevin Holland's going to have an advantage striking. I think he'll have an advantage in the wrestling department if it goes to the ground with jiu-jitsu. He's just a very good, well-rounded fighter. I love him here. When it comes to DFS, Kevin Holland will be a mainstay in all of my lineups. I would be shocked at 8,200 that he doesn't end up in the optimal, especially because he is going to be a big favorite. He's priced down at 8,200 because he was supposed to fight Muradov, who, that was your 8K, 8,200. Those odds was basically a pick'em fight, right? And those guys are, Muradov was a dangerous fighter. He's got vicious power in his hands. So I'm going to have a ton of Kevin Holland. For Ontiveros, I don't even have a price point for him yet in DraftKings. We'll see what happens, but I have a feeling he's going to be in the low 7Ks. He's got a ton of finishes, so maybe he becomes a dart throw, but taking this fight on a short notice like this and going up against tough competition in Kevin Holland, it's just he's going to be someone that I'll ultimately avoid. So we'll move on to the next fight on the main card, which is a fight between Greg Hardy and Maurice Green. We'll start off with Greg Hardy, who is 6-2 as a professional, and he is 3-1-1 in his 5 most recent fights. He's got victories over Yorgan De Castro, Juan Adams, and Dmitry Smolyakov. His loss came to Alexander Volkov. But here's the thing with Greg Hardy, right? He's just ridiculous athlete, former professional football player. And when he first joined the UFC was very raw. When he's fighting opponents that aren't elite fighters, he's going to have an advantage just on pure athleticism and power. And in his 2 most recent fights, his fight against De Castro and his fight against Volkov, who are legit UFC talent heavyweights, he has really improved and has looked so much better in his striking and boxing. Now, before, he just looked very, he just knew that if he landed a big strike and connected, he could probably put you to sleep. But in his most recent fights, he's been able to put together some combinations, stay behind his jab, and those are things that I like to see in a fighter who's growing and maturing as they're becoming a veteran. For Maurice Green, he's 3-2 in his 5 most recent fights in the UFC. Most recently had that crazy submission victory, modified choke from bottom is what Tapology calls it. I've never seen anything like it. I couldn't believe, and he was losing that entire fight to John Vellante, but was able to pull out that crazy choke. Also has victories against Junior Albini and Jeff Hughes, losses to Alexei Olenek and Sergey Pavlovich. Maurice Green's a big boy too, so he's actually going to have a size advantage over Greg Hardy. 6'7", he'll have a 2-inch reach advantage as well. Here's the thing. I don't think Maurice Green is a great fighter. He got lucky against John Vellante. And that was John Vellante, who's moved up through the years as he continues to gain weight, right? It was his first heavyweight bout. And John Vellante is what is he, 6 foot tall? Maybe 6'1". So Green had a huge size advantage, and John Vellante was just outclassing him, striking, really, and in wrestling exchanges. So I think Greg Hardy should have his way with Maurice Green here. And Maurice Green has been finished. He was knocked out by Pavlovich. He was tapped by Juan Espino. He has a little bit of a questionable chin. So I really love Greg Hardy here. And it makes sense. The odds are the way they are. Greg Hardy minus 335. Maurice Green plus 275. When it comes to DFS, I'm going to have a ton of exposure to Greg Hardy. He's priced up at 8,800, which I'm cool with. He hasn't been a great fantasy performer, right? Because he got DQ'd in his first fight. He put up 97 against Smolyakov, 108 against Adams. He had the no decision against Ben Sassoli, only 27 fantasy points, not great. And then 23 against Volkov, not great. 58 against Jorgen De Castro, went the distance. He's a heavyweight, right? Like, he's not a volume puncher. With that being said, I think he's able to finish Maurice Green here and pay up to that 8,800 price point. If he does that, he'll probably end up in the optimal. For Maurice Green, this is a heavyweight fight. This is a fight that I am targeting. So I will probably, at 7,400, have a lineup or two with Maurice Green, but that's as far as I'll take it. He's not a core 7K option for me this weekend. So we'll move on to the next fight on the main card, which is a fight between Bobby Green and Thiago Moises, taking place in the lightweight division. We'll start off with the veteran Bobby Green, who's 27-10 now as a professional, and he's 3-2 in his 5 most recent fights. He's on a nice little 3-fight win streak. Victories over Alan Patrick, Lando Venata, Clay Guida. His losses came to Francisco Trinaldo and Drakkar Klose. He'll be fighting Thiago Moises, who's also 3-2 in his 5 most recent fights. Only 4 of which have come to the UFC. One was in the Contender Series, but victories over Michael Johnson and Kurt Holloway, losses to Damir Ismagulov and Beneil Dariush. A little bit of a clash of styles here, right? Because Moises is a jiu-jitsu guy, grappler. Bobby Green is a guy that strikes and has really good boxing skills. This is an interesting fight for me because there's 2 things that I want to look at when breaking down this fight. The first thing is Bobby Green's takedown defense is 74%, which is really good. Not only that, but when he is taken down, he always seems to work his way to the cage and he's able to get back up. Second thing is Thiago Moises' 28% takedown accuracy is not great. And when I was looking at Bobby Green's resume, you have to go all the way back to 2009 was the last time that he lost via submission. So that's definitely concerning. And it makes sense. That's why Vegas has Bobby Green as a relatively large favorite here at -320. Thiago Moises is +260. I like Green to win the fight, but this isn't a fight that I'm interested in betting in because Bobby Green's not really known for being a finisher. And Moises has some legit jiu-jitsu skills. He could grab an ankle or a leg, get you in an ankle lock or a key lock, something like that, and it can be over real quick. And that's exactly what he did to Michael Johnson. When it comes to DFS, Bobby Green's really priced up at 9K. I mean, he's had some really good performances in his last 3 fights because he's a guy that's going to land a significant amount of strikes. He's a high-volume guy. 96 points against Patrick. 125 against Venata, 83 against Guida. So despite not having a ton of finishing potential, he can still rack up some points. And this week, just the quality of fighters on this card I don't love. So inevitably, I am going to have some lineups with Bobby Green. With that being said, Thiago Moises, priced all the way down at 7,200. I love him here. He's the perfect tournament GPP guy that you want to get in your lineups because at any point he can pull off a submission, and if he does that, he's able to finish the fight, then he's going to pay up that 7,200 price point. He's one of the cheapest fighters on the slate. So with that being said, I keep saying with that being said, I'm going to try to stop saying it that often. So I apologize. 71 points against Michael Johnson, 95 points against Holloway. So, if he can pull off a submission or if he can land a few takedowns, he's going to pay up. I'm going to definitely have a fair share of exposure to Thiago Moises. He's a guy that, because of his finishing ability, and he's priced so cheap and he's not fighting a super dangerous opponent, those are the type of guys that I like to target. So we will move on to our featured prelim, which is a fight taking place in the lightweight division as well. This is a fight between Alexander Hernandez and Chris Grutzemacher. We'll start off with Alexander Hernandez, who's 11-3 as a professional, and 3-2 in his 5 most recent UFC fights. Victories over Francisco Trinaldo, Olivier Aubin-Mercier, and Beneil Dariush. The losses coming to Hernandez were from Donald Cerrone, who knocked him out, and Drew Dober just 5 months ago viciously knocked out Alexander Hernandez. For Chris Gruetzemacher, this is an Ultimate Fighter guy. He was the guy that got knocked out by Artem Lobov on the Ultimate Fighter, but he's 14-3 as a professional, but just 2-2 in the UFC thus far. So he's got victories over Joe Lazone and Abner Liveris. His losses were to Davi Ramos and Chas Skelly, both tough opponents that were able to sub him. This is such an interesting fight for me. This was the one surprising fight on the card. And the thing that surprised me were the odds in this one. Alexander Hernandez is minus 420. Gruetzemacher's plus 335. Doesn't make that much sense. Is Hernandez the better striker? Is he the younger fighter? Is he the more athletic fighter? Is he the more proven fighter in the UFC? Yes. But he's also shown that he's chinny. And if you can land a big shot on his chin, he can't take it, he can't handle it, and he'll go to sleep. So Chris Gruetzemacher is super durable. Yes, he's been subbed by Davi Ramos, who's one of the best BJJ guys in the UFC. Yes, he was subbed by Chas Skelly, another guy that's a wily veteran that is a good UFC fighter, UFC level competition for sure. But outside of that, Gruetzemacher has been really good on the regional scenes. He looked good on the Ultimate Fighter. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think, do I think Gruetzemacher wins this fight? If I was a gun to my head, am I picking Hernandez or Gruetzemacher? I'm picking Hernandez. But I would never be comfortable betting Alexander Hernandez at minus 420. That's absolutely crazy. When it comes to DFS, I feel the same way. Alexander Hernandez is the most expensive fighter on the slate at 9,300. You have to go all the way back to his victory in his UFC debut against Beneil Dariush in 2018, where he was able to put up over 100 points. He's only done that once. His 3 most recent UFC fights, 32 fantasy points, 43 fantasy points, 25 fantasy points. It's crazy that he's priced all the way up at 9,300. And in all honesty, if you take that Dariush victory off of his resume, and it's easy to say that, but my point is that he just happened to land the perfect shot on Dariush and knock him out early on in that fight. But if you take that off of his resume, he would be a 2-2 UFC fighter with victories over Trinaldo and Aubin-Mercier, which isn't that impressive. And both of those victories were decisions. It's not like he went out and just starched guys. So I don't like Alexander Hernandez at all this week. I would much rather pay for Gruetzemacher, who's priced all the way down at 6,900. Coming off of a great performance where he landed 128 significant strikes against Joe Lazone. So I will have some lineups with Chris Gruetzemacher. Probably won't have too many lineups with Alexander Hernandez. All right, moving on to the next fight on our prelims here. This is a fight between Adrian Yanez and Victor Rodriguez. Both these guys are making their UFC debuts, and they are fighting in the bantamweight division. We'll start off with Adrian Yanez, who's 11-3 as a professional, and he is on a nice little 4-fight win streak. Victories over Brady Huang on the Contender Series. He just knocked him out. He looked pretty vicious. And then he fought for LFA, so pretty solid organization. Split decision victory over Kyle Estrada. He also fought for Fury. He had victories over Michael Rodriguez and Warren Stewart, both by finish. You got to go all the way back to, it's been about 2 years when he lost to Miles John, who's also on this card, Miles Johns, and we're going to talk about him in a little bit later. And that was a split decision loss. So he's taking on Victor Rodriguez, who's also on a 4-fight win streak. Now he's fought for some regional promotions, Power Plant, AFC, promotions that I'm not too familiar with. So I had to do a little bit of research and watch Victor Rodriguez. Couple things that I want to point out. Yanez is going to be 2 inches taller. He's also going to have a reach advantage. The other thing is, I expect this fight 100% to stay standing. This is a fight that you probably want to target as well in DFS, which we'll talk about in a few seconds here. But Victor Rodriguez is a brawler. He's a guy that will take one to give one. And if you look, every single fight that he's been in, he's won by finish, which is, again, one of the things that you want to see. When he's lost, he's also been finished as well. And if you look at his competition, really he hasn't fought anybody noticeable except for in his most recent fight where he fought Jared Mazurek, who had a record of 8-1. For Yanez, looking at his resume and watching him fight, he's got some pretty good striking skills. I think he's the more polished and technical striker of the two fighters. And he's another guy that can string together some finishes. And Yanez has never been finished. So I definitely favor Yanez in this fight. I think he's the more polished striker. He has the ability to finish his opponents. He's also going to have a size advantage. I think he's also fought tougher competition. And Vegas agrees with me because if you look at the odds in this one, Yanez is minus 450. Money has just been flooding on Yanez. He's also one of the more pricier fighters when it comes to DFS. He's priced up at 9,200. I'm definitely going to have my share of Yanez. It just is going to come down to how much I am able to get of him. I'd rather pay 9,200 for him than pay 9,300 for Alexander Hernandez or 9K for Bobby Green because I think he has the most finishing potential out of all of the fighters in that 9K price point. For Rodriguez, at 7K, he's not a bad option because it does have a 100% finishing rate and he does throw hard. So if he's able to catch Yanez, he could put him to sleep. I don't expect it to happen, so I'm not going to have a ton of Victor Rodriguez, but I may have a few lineups here or there with him sprinkled in. All right, we'll move on to the next fight on the prelims here, which is a fight between two UFC veterans, Sean Strickland and Jack Marshman. We'll start off with Sean Strickland, who's 20-3 as a professional, and he's 3-2 in his 5 most recent UFC fights. He's got victories over Nordine Taleb, Court McGee, and Tom Breeze, which is pretty impressive. His losses, Elizeu Zaleski and Kamaru Usman. Tough draws there. Taking on Jack Marshman, the Hammer, fighting out of Wales, who is 23-9 as a professional, and he is 2-3 in his 5 most recent UFC fights. The victories were to John Phillips and Ryan James. The losses were to Edmund Shabazian, Carl Roberson, and Antonio Carlos Jr. These guys are pretty evenly matched. Sean Strickland will be an inch taller. I think Sean Strickland is a much better striker than Jack Marshman, and I want to look at some of the stats here to back up that claim. So Strickland lands 4.34 strikes per minute at a 35% striking accuracy and absorbs 3.62 strikes per minute. Jack Marshman, 2.64 strikes landed per minute, 28% accuracy, 3.54 strikes absorbed. The other thing is Jack Marshman really has no grappling ability. 20% takedown defense, and he's never shot for a takedown in the UFC. 0% takedown accuracy. For Strickland, 57% takedown accuracy, which is solid, and he's landing 1.37 takedowns per 15 minutes. So, this is a fight where I just think Strickland has a huge advantage no matter where it goes. I think he's the better striker. I think he's fought tougher competition. And if for some reason they start to mix it up and things go south, I believe that he's a guy that could, resort to his grappling and have no problem taking Jack Marshman down. When it comes to DraftKings, I love Strickland. I'm going to have a ton of him. Now, he is priced all the way up at 9,100. So for me, as I mentioned earlier, with the 9K fighters, Hernandez, Yanez, Green, and Strickland, you're going to have to get one of those guys probably in your lineup. I'll probably have more exposure to Strickland than anyone else because I think he has I'm comfortable with him, right? I've seen him fight a bunch, and I think he's got the easiest path to victory. He might not have the same amount of finishing potential as Yanez, but with that being said, in his most recent fight, he looked super impressive against Nordine Taleb, and he was able to get him out of there. He has been able to finish people in the UFC. And, he's put up 116, 93, 108, 94. And he's put up some pretty good fantasy performances in the UFC. Jack Marshman, I just want nothing to do with him. I will not have a single lineup with Jack Marshman. It's just, he's been abysmal. 0 against Shabazian, 46 in a victory against Phillips, 11 to Roberson, 1 to Carlos Jr., he's just not a good fantasy performer. I don't really think he's UFC level competition in my opinion. So we will move on to the next prelim, which is a prelim fight between Jason Witt and Cole Williams. This fight's taking place in the welterweight division. This is one of the trickiest fights, I think, to break down on this card because these guys are super similar fighters. We'll start off with Jason Witt, who's 17-6. He will be making his second appearance in the octagon. He fought 4 months ago to Takashi Sato, who absolutely flatlined Jason Witt. And Cole Williams here, he's also going to be making his second trip to the octagon. He was subbed by Claudio Silva a year ago, so it's been a while since we've seen Cole Williams. Now, I had to do some digging and pull up some fights from regional promotions and stuff like that when I was researching this fight. Jason Witt did fight for LFA. I think it was easier to get some footage on him than Cole Williams, who's kind of fought for an organization called Pinnacle Combat, but I was able to find some stuff on him. These guys are similar fighters, which is interesting. They're similar in size as well. Cole Williams will be a little bit taller, have a little bit of a reach advantage, but I think Jason Witt is the better fighter based on what I saw. I think he's the more polished striker for sure. I think this is a fight that, for the most part, is going to remain standing, and I lean Jason Witt in this one. I really do. Now I'm looking at the odds. Jason Witt's minus 145. It makes sense. Neither of these guys have been successful in the octagon yet. This isn't one that I'm comfortable betting either way. Another thing that I want to point out is I want to see Cole Williams on the scale. This is a guy that, when I was watching his footage, he looked big, man. He looked, and when I mean big, just chunky for a welterweight. So we'll see. Maybe he has a hard weight cut. In his most recent fight, he did look to be in better shape. So, hopefully he's taking things serious now that he's in the UFC. But I'm gonna lean Jason Witt. This is a fight that, from a DFS perspective, it's hard to get a ton of exposure to because they are evenly matched, and neither of them are guys with a ton of finishes on their resume. So Jason Witt's priced at $8,300, Cole Williams priced at $7,900. I don't know. I just don't have this isn't a fight that I'm circling or targeting and saying I need one of these guys. Will I have some lineups where I end up having one of these guys in my lineup? Probably, just because I'm a degenerate and I play a bunch of cards, especially in these GPPs. And one of these guys could end up in the optimal based on where they're priced, but I can't tell you that I would lean one way versus the other. I think it's gonna come down to lineup construction. So we'll move on to the next fight, which is a fight that's taking place in the light heavyweight division between Dustin Jacoby and Justin Ledet. We'll start off with Dustin Jacoby, who's making his UFC debut here. He was on the Contender Series just about 3 months ago, and he's 3-2 in his 5 most recent fights. He's fought for Titan FC. He's fought for Bellator. Wasn't too successful for Bellator. I will point that out. And then Justin Ledet, who is now 2-3 in his 5 most recent fights, and he is on a 3-fight losing streak. He's a pretty big underdog in this one. I'm just looking at the numbers. Ledet's plus 290, Jacoby's minus 350. I'm not really sure why. I'm not seeing anything from Dustin Jacoby that makes me think that he's going to be this blue chip prospect in the UFC in the light heavyweight division, because I'm just going through his resume here. One of the things that I will point out was he took a really long time off. He is a kickboxer, so as he struggled in Bellator, 5 years ago, 6 years ago with MMA, it looks like he went right to glory, started doing some kickboxing, and he has some victories over some guys that you would know. I mean, he's this guy that beat Carl Roberson in a kickboxing bout. So, also was able to beat Tony Lopez in a kickboxing bout. So, by the way, he also fought King Mo for Bellator too, or against King Mo in Bellator, and he's fought Alex Pereira, a guy that, and he lost to Alex Pereira, he lost to King Mo, but he's been in there with some names. David Branch, the World Series of Fighting, and Jacoby hasn't fought in the UFC in a long time. I was shocked. I had to go all the way back to 2012 when he fought Chris Camozzi. So Jacoby is definitely the more experienced fighter here, but I just don't think he's that impressive. Now, Justin Ledet stinks, in my opinion. I mean, I got to keep it real, right? I got to keep it real. So, Ledet's lost to Kamer, knocked out by Johnny Walker, lost to Alexander Rakic. I mean, those are some tough opponents. I don't think Alexa Kamer's that great, but he did start off his UFC career 3-0. Victories over Chase Sherman, Mark Godbeer, and Azuna Anyanwu. But, most of those were just decision victories, and I don't know. Justin Ledet just doesn't do it for me. So I will lean Jacoby here. But nothing would surprise me in this fight. Now, when it comes to DraftKings, I'm definitely going to have more Jacoby at 8,900 than Ledet. It's going to be hard for me to get to Ledet at 7,300. I'd rather pay for Moises at 7,200, probably even Mari Screen at 7,400. I mean, I might have a lineup with Ledet. For Jacoby at 8,900, I will have a few shares of him. I'm not going to go super heavy on Dustin Jacoby, but I think he's the better striker. He might be able to finish Ledet here, and if he does, then you're looking for an early finish when you're paying up at 8,900, and hopefully he can put that together, because I will have a little bit of Jacoby in my lineups. So we'll move on to the next fight here, which is a fight that's taking place in the flyweight division for the females, Courtney Casey and Priscilla Cachoeira. We'll start off with Courtney Casey, who is 9-8. Just crazy to me, because I think she's a better fighter than her record really shows. But she is now 2-3 in her five most recent UFC fights, with losses to Jillian Robertson, Cynthia Calvillo, and Michelle Watterson. Victories over Mara Barella, who doesn't beat her, and Angela Hill, which is pretty impressive. So Courtney Casey, I swear she's always in close fights, like split decision victory over Angela Hill, split decision loss to Michelle Watterson. And she went the distance against Cynthia Calvillo. She just doesn't have a ton of finishing ability, and sometimes things don't go your way when the fight goes to the judges' scorecard. For Priscilla Cachoeira, she'll always be known to me as the girl that was absolutely destroyed by Valentina Shevchenko. But she is 1-3 in the UFC so far, with losses to Shevchenko, Molly McCann, Luana Carolina. Her victory, she was able, in her most recent fight, she was able to knock out Shanna Dobson, which was shocking. But hey, I mean, in these women fights, anything can happen, I swear. These girls match up pretty well, right? Like, they're both 5'7". Casey's a little bit longer. She'll have a little bit of a reach advantage. I just think Casey's the better fighter. She's fought tougher competition. I think she's going to have an advantage when it comes to the striking. Also, Cachoeira is Brazilian, but she's not known for being like a BJJ expert. And Courtney Casey does have some submission victories on her resume, right? She armbarred Mara Borella. So based on that information, I just think Courtney Casey's the better fighter all around. And Courtney Casey's minus 260, I'm comfortable betting that. I like those odds. When it comes to DraftKings, it's just difficult for me to get a ton of Courtney Casey because really, she only has 2 finishes in her UFC career. One of which you'd have to go all the way back to 2016 against Stancu, where she was able to knock her out in the first round, and then that fight a couple months ago against Mara Romero Borella, where she subbed her early. But outside of that, like for the most part, she's not someone that puts up a ton of fantasy points. Actually, she beat Randa Marcos. I forgot that. She did sub Randa Marcos as well. So, maybe I will have a little bit more of Courtney Casey than I thought I would at 8,700. For Cachoeira, 7,500, no thank you. I don't want anything to do with her. She will be on my do not draft list. All right, so we'll move on to the first fight of the night, which this fight should really kick things off pretty well. It's a fight taking place in the bantamweight division between Miles Johns and Kevin Natividad. We finally get to see Natividad here make his UFC debut, long awaited after being super successful in LFA. And he was lined up to fight not too long ago. Something happened. I don't know if it was the weight cut. It was a short notice fight that he was taking, but anyway, it just didn't materialize. For Miles Johns, another LFA guy, a guy that came through the Contender Series, is 1-1 in the UFC, split decision victory over Cole Smith, and then he lost to Mario Batista, where he was knocked out from a flying knee. It was pretty crazy. This is good, man. It's nice to see 2 LFA guys that have really good records, 9-1 versus 10-1. They're pretty evenly sized. This is going to be a good, even fight, and one that I'm certainly targeting for DFS. But when it comes to betting this one against the spread, I actually like Natividad here at plus 130. I like the underdog in this one. I think that he is a better striker, and I think that I think he's the more powerful puncher as well. And for Miles Johns, he's coming off of a knockout, and that was all the way back in February, so he's had some time to regain himself. But, if you look at his resume, it's a lot of fights that went the distance. Decision. He had a guillotine choke victory over Eric Ellington and an arm triangle choke against Omar Benyar. Oh, that was all the way back in 2015. So now, Miles Johns does train with Fortis MMA, which is a pretty kick-ass gym. They have some killers there. This fight's going to prove who's the real deal here. If Miles Johns takes another loss, what the UFC was probably hoping he'd become might not ever materialize. But if Natividad goes out there and finishes him, or even puts on a really nice performance and lands a ton of strikes, then I really like what we have. Or the UFC should be pretty stoked with what you have in Natividad. I wanted to pull up some of the stats on this. I know we're not going to get any for Natividad, but Miles Johns averages 1.64 takedowns with a 66% takedown accuracy and 85% takedown defense. So definitely has some grappling skills. If Natividad can stop the takedown, man, I really like him when it comes to his striking. So in FanDuel, or DraftKings, DFS, I really like Natividad at 7,800. And this is a fight that, as I mentioned earlier, is a fight that I am certainly looking to roster, because these are 2 guys that should be pretty high volume guys, whether it be Natividad striking, Miles Johns counter striking, or even grappling. This is a fight that I want to grab, and especially because the odds are so close, you can really afford to get either one of these guys in your lineup. Johns is 8,400, Natividad 7,800. I will definitely have more Natividad in my lineups. I don't know how much Johns I'll get to because, Bryce Mitchell's 8,500, Courtney Casey's 8,700, Uriah Hall's 8,600. We already talked about Holland at 8,200. I think all those are better options than Johns, but Natividad at 7,800 just makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm definitely going to have a fair share of ownership. So now we're going to move on to our favorite segment that did so well for us last week. And in fact, I know I don't get a ton of people watching my videos at this point, but I know in the GPP that I was in, 25 people had like the same lineup as me, which kind of sucked because I had to split some cash. I didn't win, but I was like top 1%. So I still made some pretty solid cash with that lineup. But I wonder if there were some people out there that watched my video and then just trailed me and was like, yo, I'm going to put in the same exact lineup, because it just was weird that there were so many people that had the same lineup as me. But with that being said, I'm not going to stop putting out lineups. I'm definitely going to give you what I would enter into a GPP this weekend. And for me, we're going to start with Strickland at 9,100. We're then going to have Greg Hardy at 8,800. Uriah Hall at 8,600. Kevin Holland at 8,200. Kevin Natividad at 7,800. And Thiago Moises at 7,200. So, as always, guys, good luck this weekend. Hopefully we keep this hot streak going. We can continue to win some cash. And as always, if you could like this video, subscribe. I really appreciate it. And I'll be coming back at you next weekend with another breakdown.